Welcome to the Stories Are Soul Food podcast, presented by Cannonball Books, the kids' fiction imprint of Cannon Press.
Met a ghost of a king on the road when I first fell. Fire burning to my knees I fell. Met a ghost of a king on the road.
Episode 110.
110. I'm focused. I promise.
Well,
I'm here.
Sometimes they're better.
I'm here.
Depending on how focused, they're better when we're unfocused.
You think?
A diffuse episode.
I'm a relativist who's to say which of our podcasts are better.
Well, dude, last week's was
Hey,
great.
I can share one thing. It's fun.
Oh, okay.
Excuse me. People continue, like, the thing I hear about most is like, you don't understand AI. It's like, I do, and it's dumb.
They're like, he did it again.
He did. Oh,
he did
sorry.
it again.
He did it. There he is. Let me tell you a little story about somebody who was telling me I didn't understand AI. And so we were having a conversation, and we asked ChatGPT and incidentally, I think it's a cool tool and it's going to be useful, but English teachers should actually just brush up on their own game.
Require more.
No, they should just know their subject. So
isn't that requiring more?
Yeah. So out of curiosity, per when we first had this conversation, you asked if it was aware of my novels, and it made one up.
Yep.
The Last Mortician. And so in this conversation, we asked ChatGPT like to outline bullet point. Just give me a bullet point outline of the Ashtown Burial series. Just made stuff up. Made it up. Like, are you familiar with this book? Yes. Are you able to outline that? Yes, I would. Could you outline it in bullet points? Here it is. I'm making up chapters. Chapter 4, The Monstrumologist. They're going to the realms of the dead. They're going above the Arctic Circle. It just made stuff up. It didn't get a single chapter right. Not one, because ultimately this is mathematical prediction and probabilities, and it's trying to like, it's not doing what people think it's doing. It's not a person.
It's
and it
reasoning based on the inputs, right? I mean, I think they're fair if they say we don't understand the exact coding behind it, like exactly how that works.
Oh, no, I do. I've studied it deeply. No, of course I don't. And I don't care. I care about the philosophical nature of knowledge. And so then I was like, okay, okay, fine. This is my novel. It doesn't have a clue. It says it does, and then gives me a very detailed outline.
That's
like
wrong. Yeah.
2 bullet points, a chapter title for every chapter.
Yeah.
Every single chapter title is incorrect. Every single bullet point is incorrect. The Dragon's Tooth begins when Cyrus and Antigone's parents are killed in a freak fire. Like, no. Incorrect. Didn't happen. Not what happened. So I was like, okay, let's move.
Parents are dead. There is a freak fire. Well, no, one parent dead.
Yeah, exactly.
There is a freak fire, but
not
ramming
connect.
those two together.
Yeah. One parent's in the hospital already. One parent's dead at sea in California. You know, so anyway, so then I ask it about Shakespeare.
There's a chance that Nate wasn't famous enough, and
let's go to Shakespeare.
It thought it could make it up.
It was wrong. Asked it about Steinbeck. Incorrect. Couldn't summarize Cannery Row correctly.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it's like this
is factually too, not even English. I mean, it'll get which Supreme Court justice was a majority or minority, and then when called out on it, it'll mix them up. I mean, it's just
this is the way it is. But the point is, because it's trying to know things via prediction, probability, and all sorts of extra math stuff. It's not knowledge. It isn't. And an English teacher isn't any good if somebody tries to use ChatGPT to write their paper on Huck Finn. It's going to actually show that they're just making stuff up, because it reads like they're making stuff up. So I don't think it's that big a threat. It's going to be refined and improved and all sorts of things, but and it's going to expand its knowledge, and it's going to hook up to the internet differently. And there's all sorts of breakthroughs that are going to happen for it. So I'm not saying it's always going to be this clunky and this clumsy, but it does not replace knowledge. And people who try to use it to replace their own knowledge, all they're going to accomplish is mental atrophy for themselves, but they're not going to have achieved some higher level.
Yeah.
So like when I forget phone numbers now, it's because my phone does a better job remembering numbers than I do. And so I don't have to, but it's not going to, anyway, it's not going to replace knowledge the same way. My favorite chapter is called The Monstrumologist. Is even making up words, which pleased me a little bit. The Monstrumologist.
It sounds like a chapter out of The Last Mortician.
Yeah, clearly.
Honest.
So there was that. It was just a fun experiment. I was like, okay, fine. People are still saying that I don't understand. He just doesn't understand. I do understand how it's supposed to work. I understand.
They are the kid in the Disney movie. You just don't understand.
You don't get me, Dad. And is it a big momentous deal? Yeah, I think it's going to be a big momentous deal. And I think the people it's going to really get rid of are probably going to be the coders who coded it first. So anyway, because
that's
poetry.
That's what I heard from the coders that I know, that it's going to eliminate a bunch of middleman stuff.
Yeah.
Because you'll say connect these two things and it will connect them rather than having to get people to connect them all.
Yay. And that'll be great. So what else are we talking about today, Brian? We're talking about Spirited Away. We're talking about how we're not dogmatic ever.
Yes, if you do have a review that will make Nate cry, please do send that.
I actually am curious. I like questions. It's great to have a discussion, but it is funny.
Most people,
I was unaware, and I think you might be lying to me that I don't think we generate strong responses. I think we're
milk toast.
We're like a 72-degree breeze.
I think we're like a warm bath.
A bit of a zephyr over here, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, no, the people who replied said, "Hey, we listened to you for the strong opinions." It's like,
I'm not aware.
What's the word for whiskey? The Scotch word.
Cask strength, barrel proof.
No, the living water one. The aqua
vitae.
No, I'm trying to remember. It's the. Oh,
that's what it was first called originally.
Oh, okay. There we go. I thought there was like an Irish.
The first ever reference to whiskey is, I think, aqua vitae.
Oh, okay. Living water. That's what we are.
Yeah. I don't know.
Depending on
I'm not aware of strong opinions. You and I just sit in a room and have a chat.
Yeah. No one else.
As far as I know, we checked our strong opinions at the door, Brian.
They're like, he's doing it again.
I'm not.
Here's the question that people have.
I'm just blissfully unaware of my own operating system.
They enjoyed the zephyr of our Slumdog episode.
Yeah.
Thought the one thing we didn't follow up on, this is from Ariana, asking us, but you didn't really talk about Salim, whether his people are defending it, saying Salim redeemed himself, right? So the brother, and she was saying, doesn't seem like it to me. So I was wondering how could you talk about his sacrifice? And I think this ties in nicely because many Christians see a sacrifice like that. And they say, oh, he's a Jesus figure. It's a very sort of so I think Jesus figure typology and the sacrifice of Salim might be an interesting jumping off point. And then so I was going to ask you, Salim, obviously he dies at the end. I think you could say
he dies in a way that enables his brother to keep loving him.
Yeah.
And he also reached a limit of his iniquity. Like he had basically he reached a point where he hated what he had become, how far he had gone, and he stopped. And there's tons of people like that in the world who have a red line. They're in the motorcycle gang until this happened. This broke me. This was like the end of the line. I was in the mob until they told me to kill my brother. It's like there's a threshold beyond which they won't go. There's one place where they have some shred of nobility left.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the Salim character. He hits the line, he sacrifices himself. Like he does this. Why? He does it out of love for his brother, which has always been there.
Yeah.
We've seen that throughout. But he's also seen himself as the superior and has viewed himself as that savior character of his brother because of his brother's idiocy and naivete and innocence. He's always seen himself that way.
Yeah, very much proud.
While he's being the left hand of power, while he's being just dominant and Darwinian about the whole thing. So I think he hits a limit. He still loves his brother. He's always loved his brother. And I think he's hit a wall for how far he'll go, how far his numbness can be carried.
Because he was close. No, well, I think he decided. But the one scene where he knows his brother's going to be blinded, right?
Yeah.
As a little Salim, and decides, no, we got to get him out. But
Yep.
he's teetering there. I mean, that's what makes him a very interesting character, is to
Yeah.
watch him teetering on, do I let this
Yep.
irreversible thing happen to my brother? I think
So it's important to realize this about any good character in a story.
Mm.
Any good character is sympathetic. Like any good character is somebody that you can understand why they are where they are, or see the humanity in what they're doing, or how they got to that point.
You mean even bad guys?
Yeah. Especially bad guys. So well-told stories, they don't excuse the evil, but they don't lie about the nature of evil or brokenness or how people get to those places.
Mm-hmm.
So Salim made a choice, and that took him into a lot of dark places, and he went a lot of dark places, and yet we can still admire like who he was. When Christopher Hitchens died, his brother eulogized him. His believing brother eulogized his famously angry atheistic sibling as courageous.
Yeah.
He'd always been really courageous and unafraid.
Mm-hmm.
And how much he admired that about him. Like it's true. He was.
Yeah.
Like Hitch was,
Yeah.
Was courageous. Now, wrong, broken, really, really broken. But understandably and admirably human. Like he had strengths. There are very few people who just have no strengths. Everybody bears the image of God. And if a talented writer told a story about any character with complete omniscience, they could make you sympathetic to any human being.
Right.
And what I mean by sympathetic is not what I think a lot of people would assume, but sympathetic meaning that you actually can understand and not justify. You can disagree completely, but you can understand how they became that person. And so this is why, because they're all human. There is a common thread.
Yeah.
Every single person on this planet, there is a commonality. No matter how dark, no matter how broken, there's a commonality. They too were made in the image of God. They too were planted on this earth. They too came up and had things happen to them they responded to and other things. And they can be, this is incidentally why anti-heroes and why talented writers making audiences attached to villains in unhealthy ways is so dangerous.
Yeah.
It's just.
Well, I was immediately thinking, of course, Milton's Satan being a classic example of taking a villain and making him understandable. What do you think about that? Is that sort of what you're talking about? If we're looking, Milton telling Satan's fall in a way that allowed losers like Percy Bysshe Shelley to come around and see him as a full-on hero, rather than an anti-hero.
Well, if somebody's doing it righteously and doing it well, then it will edify and cause readers and viewers to say, there but for the grace of God.
Mm-hmm.
Like there but for the grace of God go I. I am not in and of myself. I'm not better than that person.
Yeah.
Like I don't have any like worth of myself that makes me more valuable than that person. I've been saved.
Yeah.
Like I
too
would be
rebelled.
I have a
God.
brokenness. I have I can, that road they went down. I am not morally superior without God, without the grace of God. Like there but for the grace of God am I.
Yeah.
That is a really good writer does it that way. Okay. And you humanize the fall. Like you can see it and understand it, but they're really effective cautionary tales too, but they're not just moralistic tales, Anna Karenina and other things. They can be sophisticated, they can be complicated, they can be simple. But if somebody has a villain who just pops a collar on their cape and twirls their mustache, and that villain does not view themselves as a hero, that villain does not have an agenda that you can understand, does not have motives that you can understand, then it's a bad villain.
Mm-hmm.
So even if they're really dark and arch and awful, and you're in a middle grade fantasy and it's Hermione or it's Dr. Phoenix, what are they about? What are they? Life, like bitterness and revenge is like, that's very human. Or in Dr. Phoenix's case, saving the world. He thinks he's saving humanity and advancing humanity, and he's pushing, and he's fully psycho.
Yeah.
Like he's going that direction, but he has a logic to what he's trying to do. And so whenever you have a cartoon character that you cannot understand, like you can't understand this evil, you can't understand that person, then you're doing a bad job. You've done a bad job as a writer. It's, this is a paper doll. This is somebody who's a placeholder. And this, incidentally, I could just poke the Harry Potter discussion again, but when you have good and evil, when you have good and evil, and they're basically on a philosophical level, the difference between goodness and evil is like a speed limit. It's this arbitrary designated rule. There's not like this real ethical or philosophical underpinning to the whole thing. It's like
we've had that argument because you're allowed to kill people, so it's not that Voldemort kills people.
Yeah,
it's
the Moses thing of Moses is calling down the angel of death and turning the river to blood. Like, is this dark magic? Is this not dark? Like, and it's like, well, by whose authority and to what purpose is what it comes down to in the real world. So all this to say with Salim is understandable. You understand these two boys are raised in the same kind of hell, and they respond differently. And Salim feels superior.
Yeah.
And his superiority is reinforced and affirmed at different points by the outcomes. And so he believes in it and is doing it one direction, and we can understand him, but we still see him reach an end where he's not all gone. He's bad. He's done a lot of terrible things, but but he's not inhuman at this point. He actually still has, by the grace of God, some humanity left. And he sacrifices himself. That's more of like a real journey than it is, a Christ figure, or he's fully redeemed. It's like, no, he's not fully redeemed. He just hit a wall. He wouldn't go past, that.
Yeah. So in that case, he's much more, and this is what Ariana said, much more of a Judas figure than a Christ figure, because he has that regret.
Yeah.
Transferring, or the regret that reaches a limit where you say,
except for, Judas just hangs himself. It's like he's still being selfish.
Yeah.
And what Salim's doing is better than Judas. Yeah, he's a little better.
Yeah, I guess. Well, part of what makes me wonder though is the money in the bath.
Yeah.
Feels so planned and theatrical.
Yeah.
That it's almost like Salim wouldn't do that. I don't know. I guess that's the
well,
one
except
thing
for it's the end.
Yeah.
It's like he knows it's the end. This is the end.
Yeah.
And I think he knows it's a death scene, and so
he wants it to be memorable.
Yeah, it needs to be, fitting.
So he wants, in some sense, he's come to realize that, I've died for money.
He's just dying on his money. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it works. I like it a lot. And no, I would not say that he's a Christ figure. I think he's a real kid who chose another way.
Yeah.
And they both ended up with a ton of money. And that's the parallel. They both end up with a ton of money, but one's dying on it, it's blood money, and the other is receiving it because of how much he's given.
Yeah.
And that division is pretty interesting. But it is like in anything we criticize, it's like, okay, so here's the bad guy. Well, okay, what does the bad guy want?
Yeah.
Who is he? How did he get here? What's his background? How did he become this?
Right. Okay. All right.
I love playing in middle grade because I can work with arch. I can work with big arch villains and that kind of stuff. Yeah. But you can also work with arch good guys.
Yeah.
You can also have in Lord of the Rings, you can have very, very bad guys, and they're just bad. But you also can have very, very good guys who are just good. Well, that's what I was
going to ask is Sauron. He seems pretty one-dimensional, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So
it's a good thing he gets 0 screen time.
Because, although, now that I said that, I guess both Gandalf and Galadriel don't see Sauron as one-dimensional. They say, we would be Sauron.
No, they also know the backstory. They know the fall. So he's one-dimensional now.
But he had that moment.
But there was a journey.
And they say, hey, instead of a Dark Lord, you'd have a beautiful queen, or whatever, what the Galadriel line is.
Yep.
And so I guess she doesn't think of Sauron that way. She understands that desire that he had way back in. I'm still slogging my way through the Silmarillion, and
just don't.
Well, out of joy,
Okay,
it's
fine.
a joyful
Okay,
slugging.
okay, fine.
It's a joyful slugging.
You don't have to, Brian.
No,
It's
I know,
okay.
I know. Morgoth is there's something where you understand him. The Valar are being so happy, and then he's mad that he's cut out of it by his own decisions, and that motivation is very human too.
Yeah,
It's very Grendelly to see joy over there that you didn't allow yourself to be part
Grendelly.
of, and then to just double
Grendelly
down.
is the word of the day. Chapter
Yeah.
1, Grendelly.
Take that.
The novel is The
ChatGPT.
Monstrumologist. Chapter 1,
Grendelly.
Grendelly.
Yeah.
It's Grendelly. I think the understanding we now have a culture that wants to like honor evil and darkness and you know make you connect to it. Sorry, turn my phone. I guess my phone is off. Put it over there. A shout out to Christine Cohen calling during the podcast. Sorry, Christine. Not talking to you right now. The honor, the love, like praising what is damnable and damning what's praiseworthy. That's something our culture does now. But forget all that. Push it away. You know, it's like, can you redeem characters? Can you connect to guys? Can you actually, you know, can you get there? There's a character who is involved with rescuing trafficked kids in Latin America, and his backstory, and he does this all very undercover.
Wait, in which show?
This is for real.
Oh, a real character,
Real dude, God's show. So he's Colombian, and he's kind of just given his later decades to trying to rescue traffic victims. And this is all connected to he was one of Escobar's narcos. I mean, he was like a bad dude.
Mm-hmm.
And he reached a red line for himself and was going to kill himself. And basically would say that he received a command from God to not, and to just focus on rescue. And so that's what he's been doing ever since. Like there are times when like, okay, it's real bad, breaks and repents and like transformation. There are just amazing Holy Spirit transformations that happen. But most of the time that guy pulls that trigger or lays himself down, like somebody who gets to a place where he's been involved in so much darkness that he's
so much compromise.
Yeah. That he either hardens himself, numbs himself, cauterizes himself, and then goes even deeper into the darkness, or he, you know, drinks himself into oblivion or,
right,
you know, something like that, ODs. That's usually when people are in places that dark, that's normally how it goes. But it's interesting to watch God transform characters actually and what it looks like. And it doesn't look like what Salim did. That's a natural out. That's just the natural end
of a bad man,
of where he was going, but a bad man who loved his brother and, and did have a
Right.
lot of very bad people, mobsters and so on, have their code and they keep their code.
Yeah.
And they use it to kind of like survive in their own darkness.
Yeah.
I still have a code. I still have my, my standards. And I think that's where he was as the protector, as the guy who loved his brother. And that was it.
I think Hemingway, it shouldn't surprise anybody when you're talking about heroic codes, of course. Hemingway comes to the top of the mind, and seeing that he ended up killing himself isn't a surprise to anybody who's read Hemingway, because all his stories are laced with that idea of you follow your code until you can't. And when you can't, it's over.
Yeah.
And
it's over.
So I don't know. That's a Salim character right there.
For sure. Well, we should talk about Spirited Away.
Okay.
Also,
unless you want to make it a lamp for 2 months.
don't.
He doesn't want to.
I don't want to make it a lamp.
No lamp. Let's do it.
I know what the next lamp is.
Yeah, it is. Jesus Revolution. You all know that already.
I know what the one after that is, and it's not Spirited Away.
Oh, wow. This is some prophecy right here.
So we'll talk about Spirited Away right now. What do we need to talk about?
So, should this episode be criticizing people for not understanding it, or helping them to understand?
I am not that kind of person,
great?
Brian.
Yeah, I guess.
What do you think of me? I would never.
Well,
I would never criticize.
I think it's easier just to tell people that they don't understand. For
Spirited Away.
Why do people? I know many folks who've watched it, including my own children. So I battled this, where they watched it and said that was weird.
Correct.
And then
Yeah,
that weirdness can become a barrier.
yeah, true. That's true analysis.
Right.
It was weird.
That was weird. And I think that's probably most people
Yeah.
who don't like Spirited Away. They would say
It was just too weird for me.
that was strange.
Yeah, it was strange. I think there's two things going on in Spirited Away. And yeah, I threw out the title because it was, fun.
Mhm.
But the two things that are going on are, one is it is a classic Western fairy tale.
Yep.
And so take away the costumeries, take away the character design.
The fact that there are little edges on the buildings.
Yeah.
Take that away.
Take away just the
Asian.
the Eastern decor and setting, and look at the architecture of the story. A spoiled girl with her parents arrive at a cursed feast, and her parents greedily and selfishly eat the cursed food and are turned into pigs.
No surprise. We've read that a billion times.
Yeah, okay. So have you ever heard a story where there's forbidden food or cursed food and people eat something they shouldn't eat? I wonder where that came from. And then it like enslaves their descendants into
you get that
service to evil
from the Bible. You get that in Persephone.
We kind of know it's everywhere. It's just baked into the bones of mankind.
You don't
eat the food,
especially the spirit food.
Don't eat the food. And so all the regrets that we have as a race around having eaten the food show up in this fairy tale format over and over and over again. So the daughter ends up enslaved in a witch's palace, a witch's castle, in this case a witch's bathhouse.
Yeah.
She is now, think about that, she's enslaved into the service of, like, she's a slave of darkness serving darkness. So this witch's bathhouse, like, who goes to this bathhouse?
Spirits.
It's the spirits. It's it's the unclean. Like it's really weird where she's going to a place where her job is to try to clean the unclean for this witch that she's now stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And she's been told her only out is she has to ask for a job. She asks for
otherwise she'll disappear.
Yeah. And she's done. So she's now, because of the folly of her parents, she is now enslaved. And she is enslaved in this dark spirit kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Where all these different spirits are coming, and the witch who has her who has her bound here to work as a slave.
She loses her name to the witch.
Yeah. Yeah.
She has to remember, right?
She's lost her name. She's lost her identity. She's being pulled into this service of darkness, and she's here to try to clean the unclean. And she, through this route of service, she eventually gets back around to redeeming her parents and saving her own humanity, the humanity of others, through having stooped low and been willing to slave this way. She pulls out a rescue.
Mm-hmm. By remembering what she's supposed to remember.
Yeah.
Another key ingredient.
Yeah, that she did the thing. This is a very classic fairy tale. The architecture is very, very basic. It's really simple. So for all of the weirdness, the architecture is Edenic. It's this Edenic architecture where humanity eats the food that is forbidden, is enslaved to the supernatural, to the inhuman, to the broken and the dark. And then in that slavery, in the fairy tale format, has to sacrifice, follow the rules, and actually lay down yourself, risk yourself, jeopardize yourself to save others out of bondage, which is what she does.
Mm.
So she pulls, all these different people, including her parents and herself, but all these different characters are bought out of bondage. Like she redeems
the witch's kid.
The river, she does.
She cleans the river.
Yeah, she's saved.
I think it should be clear that Miyazaki doesn't view the spirits as all bad.
Nor does C.S. Lewis.
Right.
It's like he's completely in agreement with C.S. Lewis about this.
Right.
But she's enslaved to the spirit kingdom, and the hierarchy is supposed to be man judging angels, and it's actually been flipped because of the forbidden food.
That's nice.
But the fairy tale there is very, very simple and Edenic. Don't eat the food. Oh, garbage. You ate the food.
Mhm.
Now you're in bondage. Like now you're in bondage to this world, to this
Right,
other
right.
world is now they're the rulers now.
Yep.
And you have to redeem. You have to actually like
Yeah.
go down, go low, and then redeem. And that's what the story does. And so it is a very classic Western fairy tale, but it's dressed up in all this Eastern design and so on that makes it, I think, really, really fun, really
Yeah.
interesting to watch because it's not just the same old Disney thing you've seen 100 times. You're seeing a new take on Western Edenic redemptive architecture. That's what this is. So it's Edenic redemptive architecture in a fairy tale that you've seen
Right.
many times in Western Christian storytelling. It's just in this Asian garb. Now, on the flip side, there's some ironies here that I like. This is just another layer. It's this also condemnation of greed and like the like greed and the post-war greed that consumed Japan as it went into the boom, the 80s really. But it's like as that economy finally exploded, taking the money of the West. And so you have like No Face, one of these demons shows up.
I mean, there's not.
And it's just giving gold to everybody, can just buy anything and then devours.
There's
and she's
no better symbol for greed than No Face.
No Face.
And they invite it in.
Yeah,
and it's in there.
And they invite No Face in, this really dark demon, and it's just greed. And he's giving out gold to devour. And she's the only one who like actually puts a stop to this and saves all of these people.
Yeah.
And so one of the ironies here is Miyazaki is exploring what it's like having a culture subsumed by conquerors. And so Japan, the culture of Japan, the old culture, is the culture of emperor worship and
imperial
racism.
Yep.
Doing horrible things, and World War II, et cetera, and then being defeated by the West. And so one of the things that's really interesting is it's while talking about the brokenness and the awful destruction of greed and Western conquest over Japanese culture, he also chooses Western architecture to the narrative.
Yeah.
And so the narrative is this redemptive Western narrative.
Mm-hmm.
While there's also this other piece on top that is really about, the parents are greedy. They show up. They're just like, I have to eat it. I have to devour it. They've forgotten, who they are. They've forgotten who they are in their culture. They've forgotten their names. They've forgotten. And that forget your name thing about forgetting Japan, forgetting your culture is another piece. So they devour the food. The greedy pigs turn into pigs. No Face shows up, giving out gold, devouring everybody. Like greed, like that greed and that conquest is on the skin level. So it's a skin level exploration of the power, the destructive power of greed, but on the architecture that's Edenic and redemptive. And so those two layers, I think, play together really interestingly. Yeah. So some people say it's a condemnation of the West. It's not a condemnation of the West.
Yeah.
It isn't.
Miyazaki went and was educated in Europe, I believe. So I mean, he's studied.
Yeah. No, he's a super intelligent guy, but so there is this condemnation of forgetting who you are. Like forgetting who you are because you're greedy.
Yeah.
And so the fact that No Face is No Face, doesn't even have a face, name,
can't talk,
just No Face is greed, shows up just ready to devour you in exchange for gold. The parents have pigged out, become pigs. And you have those kinds of layers about what greed does to you and forgetting who you are and where you came from, what your culture is. And so if you're I may have mentioned this before, but my grandfather was given I don't know, like a 500-year-old samurai sword in Japan.
I don't think I've heard this.
So he led a samurai to the Lord, or was involved, and this guy felt that he needed to give up the sword because he had been so consumed by ancestor worship, and by only caring about his name and who he was and where and that legacy was the only thing he cared about. And then he took the name of Christ, became a Christian. It was like, I can't care about that anymore because that's been all I cared about. So he presented the samurai sword to my grandfather as like, this was the thing. This was, and my grandfather told me you could see all these little nicks in the blade from arrowheads through battles of the centuries, and he said you could still shave with it. He actually did.
Wow.
Shave with this thing, and shark skin handle, like just the hilt, everything about it was epic. My grandfather kept it for a while until the guy became more mature in his faith. And it was probably like, I don't know, 10 years, 5 years, but it was years later that he returned it to him.
Oh, that's great.
It's like, you need to remember who you are. You need to know who you are, but you need to not have such a broken relationship with it.
Yeah.
So, like that's kind of like, if you think about the strength of the Japanese culture, the things that are amazing about it, and then you think about it ran amok and got stomped by the West in World War II. Who are you? Who are we on the other side of that is really wild. And that's a really confusing time. So Miyazaki, then the 80s show up, and in the 80s and everything's made in Japan and Japan money and everything's booming. It's not that way now, but there was this moment where it's like, what even are we?
Yeah.
Like, what are we anymore? And so that's there too. And that's why the theme of remember your name, remember who you are.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
I mean, I think he was exploring that in tons of his movies.
Oh yeah.
Watching.
No, that's one of his hobby horses.
Right.
For sure.
The Wind Rises, about the creator of the Zero, right? The Zero, this beautiful airplane that then turned into like the worst thing.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
That same dynamic of what do you do with something that's so cool, but used for badness.
Yeah, it's been horrible.
Yeah.
It's like the samurai swords, that one sword had probably been tested, like many of them had, by how many villagers you could cut in half at one swing. It's like where they would stack them up, line them up, and see if you could take it through 6, 5. How many people can I cut in half with one swing? It's like that's pretty bleak. It's like so. It's like they became proud, they rose, and then God smacked them, and the God happened to have used us to smack them, our ancestors, and then the West and all that stuff showed up. So I really, really like the fact that he goes after greed. He goes after just the devouring toxicity of greed on the skin level of that story, while then putting it on the Western architecture in some ways, like openly declaring he's not just attacking the West here. Like he puts it on this Edenic redemptive Western fairy tale structure, but then explores, Japan's enslavement, really, both directions.
Right. And I mean, I think you also have a lot of people are weirded out by the bouncing heads and the big baby, right? But I think that yet again is another example of infantilization and the failure to mature. All these things that Chihiro needs to do. Yep. She's bumping into them.
She's bumping into the things that will challenge her in different ways. Now the big baby's weird. Yeah, super weird. But at the same time, move into Western fairy tales, and there's a ton of really weird things.
Yeah, go read some of those.
But even think the ones we're just familiar with. It's like things that by rote we can just do, and it's not weird to us because we've seen it a ton of times. We're familiar with everything that's Grimm on down. Grimm's fairy tales on down, and all of those things. Now, if you do go read the originals, and you've got people chopping off their toes to try to get their feet into the glass slipper, into Cinderella's glass slipper, it's a lot more grim than the Disneyfied version.
We just saved the pumpkin into the carriage. That's what we saved.
But Beauty and the Beast, like, what do you, it's like,
that's metaphorical for sure.
It's but what you get in there and like, this is weird, but we're used to it. This is like a Western catechism. We're normalized to it. So when we watch Spirited Away and we don't see a little, we don't have a monster falling in love with a very young girl that we're somehow okay with this.
Right. Or Little Red Riding Hood. We don't have someone getting eaten by a wolf and then getting cut out again. It's that
we have a oversized baby, and we're like, that's just too weird for me. Right. So there's some really beautiful sequences. Some of my favorite sequences, and I think all of filmmaking are in Spirited Away.
Oh, which ones? The Boiler Room?
Boiler Room's great, but really like the quietness of the train.
Yeah.
When she's finally leaving, she's heading way out there, and the just in water, just like is pretty phenomenal. I mean, that's really, really cool and well done, especially after how frenetic,
Yeah.
everything is. And so industrialization is a piece of this. There's the boiler room. Here's the train, and so Miyazaki's kind of walking this line of like, how do we preserve how are we anybody? What are we really? And how do we merge and marry different parts of these things into our culture and still be ourselves? But get bought out, but get redeemed from all of this, which is what the story's doing. So I like the story a lot. It's fantastic. But think about it like The Matrix too. The Matrix, a lot of people are jump on and on about it. It's messianic, yada yada. And you're like, yeah, okay, I can see that. I can see how it's it's pulling this, but yeah, okay, you can see some Buddhism too, right? And can you see that also? You could also get that there. And can you see the trans, can you see how these directors ended up trans?
Yeah.
How this,
Right.
this mind game they're playing about identity and,
right.
And so some people, the youth group could real quickly get to the messianic piece. But if you pay attention to the bigger thing and what's going on and the direction of it, the later films and where it leads, then it tells you a little bit more about, other things that are there too. So
I think with Spirited Away and a lot of Miyazaki's stuff, the ability to transport you out of where we are, like when she goes or when they go through that doorway.
Right.
Now, obviously, well, you wrote 100 Cupboards, so you like doorways to other
I
places.
like doors. I'm fond of doors.
But any sort of liminal fantasy like that, where you immediately feel that something's changed and the music cues it all up and the beautiful scenery and
the color palette and everything else.
That kind of thing is just enjoyable. I don't know what more you'd want out of a cartoon.
I like Howl's Moving Castle too, but that's another Western story that he dresses up that way.
I mean, I think that's a good contender for a movie that's better than the book.
Yeah.
I don't think it's as good or holds together as well, but
look at Brian being dogmatic. Brian, don't be so dogmatic. You're going to lose us listeners.
No, that's what gets us the listeners.
Okay.
You dogmatic.
Fine. Let's be dogmatic.
Yeah.
But so that's the Spirited Away conversation.
Yeah.
And
remember that Forrest Dickinson was saying, the moment when her friend eats the salamander?
Yeah.
Like he was saying he thinks all the spirits in the bathhouse are animals personified, or a good number of them at least. As we have humans going animal direction, animals personifying, and that helps explain some of the narrative logic behind why there's because everybody thinks she smells gross. They think a human smells weird, which begs the question, or makes you ask the question, what are they?
No, the fact that when you're in the bathhouse, you can't assume that anybody in a human form is in fact human.
Yeah.
You can't assume that. This is a place of transformation and of bondage.
Right.
This is a place where
someone could have lost.
If you're talking about the caste system, the top caste are these spirits who are power spirits who are here as consumers.
Right.
And they're here to be served. You all have to serve them. And you get all the way to the bottom, you have where she is, and you have the people who are in bondage to this place to, in service. And so, you have animals that are in, they're very froggy. You see people who are running around, but they're very froggish.
Yep.
And you have her, she's sitting here
smelling
weird.
Great example is Haku, right? You think he's so cool. You think he's kind of the heir of the bathhouse, and turns out he's another slave.
Yeah, he's another slave. Forgot his name.
Yep.
So he's been enslaved and needs to be redeemed, needs to remember his name. Now, I will also say that in my family, we've used the stink spirit a lot. It's a really
stink spirit's so good.
Yeah, it's a really helpful metaphor. Like when the stink spirit comes in, it's this big foul mess. Comes in, everybody runs, and nobody will serve the stink spirit. And this is back to industrialization and his exploration of everything else. But she's the only one who will, and she comes down and she finds like a thorn in the big, slug's side, and is going to try to get it out, and is feeling bad for him. She's feeling sympathetic, and she's truly reached a place where she's no longer the spoiled little girl, and she's only thinking of serving and of helping this, this injured thing. And it turns out it's not a thorn, it's a bike handle. And when she pulls it, she gets this bicycle to come out of the side, followed by this torrent of stuff.
Just pollution.
This torrent of stuff. All
river junk from.
Yeah, and it turns out it wasn't a stink spirit, it's a river. It's like this was a river spirit. Just completely destroyed, and so on. And we've used that a lot, like with little kids, but also I can't tell you how many times involved in helping somebody out or counseling or whatever else. There's this thing, you have a handle. You're just like, there's a thing. I got to pull this thing. And it looks really small, or like, this isn't the root issue. It just feels like this isn't the root. Whatever's going on, this isn't the root, but let's just take care of it. And when you start pulling on it, like when you still, they usually defend it to the death and they don't want you to touch it. And you're like, no, we really should deal with this. And you're not saying, like I said, you're not saying this is the root cause of whatever you're struggling with, but it's a thing here we should take care of. You pull it and then this whole torrent comes out and you realize like, oh, it wasn't like a side issue. This was like the cork. This was the thing at the top. And once you get that out, once that confession of sins happened, once you've actually gotten something addressed, the next thing comes and the next thing comes, and it's a whole just flood.
Yeah.
Until you're dealing with almost a completely different person. It's like, it's just, it's quite shocking. So there's been times when, we've joked about that when we were raising toddlers, my sisters and I, we'd reference Spirited Away. It's like,
stink spirit moment.
That stink spirit moment where you finally get the handle. It's like, we're always thrilled when you are trying to help somebody, whether your own kids or anything else. You finally get the handle. You're like, oh, I've got something. And I know this isn't it, but if I pull it, I'm going to get all of it. It's all coming. This is that handle that's going to make it happen.
I've noticed that, my little guys normally aren't too emotional, being a bunch of little boys, but when one is being super emotional about something tiny, it is that bike handle.
Oh yeah.
I know something's going on.
There's 3-4 more other things behind it.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's start with just.
Oh, it turns out you lied about something at school 3 days ago. And now there's like
or you're feeling guilty about this particular interaction that you had.
And so you've stacked up to the point where right now you're just totally irrational about the fact that your brother's grilled cheese was a little bigger than yours. So like, and once you like pull through and get all the way to the bottom, it's like, there's a ton there. It's like gunk that's just built up.
Yeah.
And so I owe Miyazaki that too, that metaphor. It's been really helpful at different points in terms of seeing it play out exactly like that. So yeah, it's on the list. It's probably a top 10 movie for me overall.
I mean, it's one of like the few DVDs I've ever bought. Because who buys DVDs anymore?
Yeah.
You just want to have it. And
it's one of the few DVDs that can make Brian say botten.
Botten.
I have bottened it. I bottened it.
The monstrumologist.
Add an ED. I bottened.
Grendely. Bottened.
Bottened. It has been bottened.
I think we did it.
Yeah, did we? Are we through? So that's Spirited Away.
Yeah. If that didn't convince you.
Do see Jesus Revolution, and I already have the next movie queued up after.
Oh, wow.
And
if you're having trouble with Spirited Away, what I did is I swung by the tiny Asian mart here, and I went ahead and picked up a bunch of different foods, including those awesome looking rice things they eat in Spirited Away, because I thought I need my kids to get past the weirdness. So we made it even weirder by eating.
We made it even weirder.
And it worked. Everyone had a great time.
Now you're going to take them over to Iron Walk and make them order off the Chinese menu.
That's right. Pick a character. Pick a picture.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And then explain to them, we don't have a Japanese restaurant.
Right.
You have to take them to the Chinese restaurant and then explain to them that it's very different.
These are not the same at all.
They do not. Totally different, and they don't like each other very much.
As far as we're concerned, though, the food could be the same.
Yeah, really not. Not even close. My kids are thrilled right now. When it's one of the small benefits of being away from home, or they can find good Japanese food. Here we don't. Awesome. We don't really.
I mean,
I've been told to go over
to good sushi or other.
Yeah, good sushi, but the other things as well. But I've been told there's good stuff in Pullman we should try, but we're still recording right now, so we're talking now about Chinese food and Japanese food.
I don't, just for the
Spirited
record,
Away could take us any number of places.
I don't actually think that Kung Pao chicken is the same as sushi. just to be clear,
I will say this though, and I'll kind of end on this. It really makes me happy when you see a continuity in a culture that runs like all the way from like city planning and architecture down to food. And when you see the Japanese just emphasis on economy, like just really, but deftness, like just really being perfect.
Yeah.
But without all the foofery, like just a minimalist perfection. Like that's what we're going to go after.
Yeah.
And when you see that
we're going to do it with our soy sauce.
Yeah.
We're going to do it with salt.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can watch I've watched too many weird documentaries.
And finding the perfect little square of that fish.
Right.
It's like,
yes.
But it's amazing. And I love seeing that. They have such a unified culture from top to bottom, just aesthetically. Which is pretty cool. So bonsai trees and sand gardens and sushi and architecture. And you're like, this is
oddly consistent.
This is all weirdly aesthetically connected.
Yeah.
It'd be hard to eat my Big Mac in a sand garden next to a bonsai tree, but I could do it. I could get it done because I'm a good American.
You'd be guilty, but you would do it.
I would get it done for sure. Well, anyway, this has been Spirited Away, and some other things at the beginning I already forgot.
Yeah, episode 110.
Peace.
I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of Stories or Soul Food, and I have something special for you because I'm excited about it, so you get to hear about it. It is this brand new book by Canon Press about stories. It's called 32. Yes, the number. 32 Christians Who Changed Their World by Dr. Glenn Sunshine. And it's stories of everyday Christians all around the world throughout history, the people you haven't heard of, true multiculturalism, and the way short stories of how their lives changed history and their own culture. It's inspirational. I mean, the Christian faith is a call to adventure. And of course, on our podcast, we love to talk about how stories affect that. And some of my favorite ways of doing that is talking about famous characters in history and not famous characters in history. Oh, and one more part. I get very excited about this stuff as a publisher. Look how cool the shiny black foil is on the nice yellow binding. It's just fun to have a nice hardback book. Anyways, this is available now. It's just releasing, brand new, 32 by Glenn Sunshine.